We ask the assistance of our mentors, of our spiritual benefactors. We invite our brothers and sisters from the spiritual realm to be here with us. And together, we hope to accomplish a constructive study and find strength and courage to put all the teachings we receive here in practice in our daily lives. We ask for our protection and for the protection of all others who cannot be here with us together, even though it's remotely. In this moment of serenity, of love, of dedication, and with our hearts filled with immense gratitude for everything that we have received already from our mentors and all the teachings that they're about to bestow upon us, we ask their permission to start this meeting. Good morning, everyone. We are back today to the book In the Greater World by Luiz, psychographed by Francisco Xavier. And we are studying the chapter about sex. That's chapter 11. And we are almost closer to the end than, at least much closer to the end than we were from the beginning of that chapter. I hope you can locate the sentence, I could see that the lecture had ended in the midst of a general feeling of respect. In my book is page, for those of you who cannot see the image, João is displaying the book, but for those of you who cannot see the image, it's around page 164, 168. It varies a little bit because of different printing editions and even different editions of the book. All right, reminding everyone that this is an overview of how humanity has been developing its ideas about sexual orientation, about the sexual act, about everything that is related to sex. So this chapter is not talking about the sexual revolution or the last 20 years or last even 50 years, but an entire overview of how we as human beings have been developing our concepts, our ideas around this topic. So this is very important that we don't lose track of this, because otherwise we may see certain sentences or we may see certain opinions from André Luiz that may not be directly relatable to what we experience today. But he's not talking necessarily of the latest, the last few years, but rather as humanity's progress with respect to this topic. So never leave this for a second. Otherwise, we get lost very quickly in the chapter with discussions that are really not pertinent to what we are going to be reading. All right. Now, we saw that Brother Calderaro and André Luiz are in the spiritual realm, and they are attending a lecture. And the lecturer, whose name is not given to us, is just finished this his explanation and is going for the question and answer part of the lecture. And that's where we stopped last time. So we're going to start here. I could see that the lecture had ended. Okay. So Zoraida, if you read, or Paco, I don't know who's going to read for us.
Okay.
Zoraida? Okay. Yeah. So
yes,
go ahead, Zoraida.
Okay. I could see that the lecture had ended in the midst of a general feeling of respect. The messenger's words had fascinated me. These concepts on sexuality were new. They were not repetitions of descriptive compendiums, nor the product of cold observations by scientists and writers concerned with producing effects through empty words. They came from words inflamed with the fraternal love of a guide dedicated to the needs of his still fragile and less joyous brothers and sisters. The audience began to stir, and I realized that the attendees could now ask questions related to the evening's topic. In fact, several were poised and all received valuable answers that were both enlightening and edifying. As the instructive inquiries continued profitably, a question was asked that piqued my curiosity. Venerable instructor, began the attendee reverently, down on earth, a considerable number of incarnate psychologists have recently adopted Freudian principles as the basis for investigating the troubles of the soul. For the great Australian doctor, almost all psychic disturbances were based on a deviant sect. Some of his disciples, however, have modified his theories somewhat, correcting the thesis of erotic hallucination, which psychoanalysis has broadly applied even to children in the study of dreams and emotions. Illustrious scholars have affirmed that every man and every woman is a bearer of the innate desire to feel important, which compels them to sustain primitive impulses of domination. Other exponents of intellectual culture affirm that the human being is a repository of all the experiences of the race, carrying with him or her a vast arsenal of tendencies towards certain lines of thought. The questionnaire paused in general silence instilled by his valuable inquiry, and then proceeded. As we are now far from the dense, incarnate body, we know that the spirit's life is disconcertingly full of surprises for earthly science. Nevertheless, since we have devoted ourselves to the task of aiding our tormented friends down on earth, couldn't you give us some appropriate explanations in that regard so that we can disseminate them later on?
Thank you.
Why is it? Okay.
Sorry. Thank you. Okay. Listen, I will not repeat an explanation of the entire lecture because that's what we've been discussing the last 2 months.
Yeah.
But I will just point out the most important topics. One is that the lecturer explained to us that we started our sexual behavior primarily as an instinctive behavior, and that we are trying to move on from this instinctive behavior and sublimating it into actions that are more related to the universal love. So the sexual conduct, the sexual behavior, sex in general, not just the act itself, but everything that is related to it, can be sublime, it's part of the creation, is part of the divine in us, and we are learning as in the same way that we are learning with everything else in our lives. Again, this is not in one lifetime, this is humanity as a whole, from the very first time until today, okay? We are moving from the very instinctive, the very animal, into something that is more rational, that is more sublime. And in doing so, we are transcending the act itself, or just the act, into something that is the more towards universal love. And what the other important point was that most of us in this process today, we are much closer to the rational than we are to the instinctive. We are still bound, unfortunately, by our thought patterns, by our behaviors, to a very domineering perspective. And in doing so, we create for ourselves just perturbations that happen at the level of our perispirit. So our perispirit then relays those perturbations to us when we reincarnate. And then as we are here with the physical body, and now we have the sexual act, or even if it's not the act, but our thought patterns, we then relay further information back to our perispirit that shows these perturbations, and they can feed these perturbations and continue the cycle, or as we improve ourselves, we improve our perispirit as well, so that our future reincarnations will not be so susceptible to these variations, to these perturbations, to these disturbances.
Mm-hmm.
Then, what we just read here today is that one of the members of the audience, remember this audience is in the spiritual realm, asks the instructor, the lecturer, about some forms of psychology, psychiatry, and he's approaching it more from the point of view of psychology here. So starts by asking about Freud, because Freud said that our problems all stemmed from originated from our sexual disturbances, our sexual perturbations. Later on, after Freud, he was a big exponent. He's considered one of the founders of modern of psychiatry, basically. We have two other schools of thought. So this person is actually in the one question putting three things together. One is Freud, that states that uh, all our disturbances, our misbehaviors, our perturbations come from sexual issues. Then we have another group of thought that actually says that it's not necessarily about sex all the time, about the sexual act in this case, but actually that we have a need for dominance, and this need from dominance comes from the exercise of our primitive impulses, our id. Our id is the most is the part that is in the recesses of our mind. It's the part that is related to our unconscious or our instinctive part. And in relaying that, in expressing that through our conscious mind, we exercise our primitive impulses in that sense of dominance. And it's this need for dominance that ends up creating all the disturbances, the perturbations in our psyche. And then there's a third one that speaks that something in between these two. Okay, so this is the idea that the person is asking. So in principle, it's just saying which one of the three is the correct one, or is there a fourth one? It didn't say anything about a fourth one, but let's say if you were there and we were asking this question, we'll probably have in our minds this idea of, is there a fourth one, or if there's no fourth one, which one of the three is the right one, if there is a right one in this case. And we are going to see now the answer from the lecturer.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay?
Okay. The wise instructor did not hesitate to clarify. I know just what you mean. You are referring to the analytical psychology movement headed by Freud and by two distinct currents of his collaborators. The famous scientist centered his teachings on the sexual impulse, conferring an absolute character on it, whereas the two currents of psychologists who were at first supportive of him have differed in their interpretation. The first one studies the congenital yearning of the individual in what is referred to as personal reverence, while the second states that besides sexual satisfaction and the importance of the individual, there is the drive of the higher life, which troubles even the seemingly happiest man or woman. For the circle of essentially Freudian scholars, all psychic problems of the personality boil down to sexual angers. For a large number of their colleagues, however, the causes extend to the acquisition of power and to the idea of superiority. We will say on our part that, although they all bear a certain dose of reason, The three schools are identical in that all of them lack the basic knowledge about reincarnation. They represent the beautiful, costly homes of scientific principles, but they lack the roof of logic. We cannot say that everything in the physical realm is geared towards sex, a wish to be important, or aspirations for something higher. However, having arrived at our current level of understanding, we can guarantee that everything in life is a creative impulse. All the beings we know of, from the worm to the angels, are heirs of the Divine One who gives us life, and we are all repositories of creative faculties. Compelled by phototropism, plants appear on the landscape, distributing life and renewing it. The firefly shines in the darkness, seeking to perpetuate itself. The amphibian feels vibrations of love and paternity in the depths of the wetlands. Tiny birds travel long distances, gathering material with which to build a nest. The beast forgets its savage nature when it tenderly licks its newborn offspring. And more than half of the millions of incarnate spirits on the earth, with their minds fixed on instinctive impulses, concentrate their faculties on sex, from which they naturally derive the greatest and most frequent nervous disorders.
Thank you.
They concentrate. Okay.
Okay. So basically, well, before I say anything, this paragraph is a bit harsh, to be honest with you. And we'll see in a moment why I think it's very harsh. Some of the choices of words are very harsh, I would say. So basically what we see here is if we take the mind, the personality, and according to Freud, we have the id, which is the instinctive in us. We have the ego, which is our relation to reality. The ego is that which we use to interact, all right? And then we have the superego, and the superego is the part that is related to aspirations. So the superego is sometimes described as the morality sense. It's not really the morality sense. It is the aspirations, that which goes beyond the reality of the moment, and is not so deeply rooted as our instinctive self. So if we take these three, we are going to see that the three schools of thought, in a way, ended up carving the mind, the psyche, actually, into these three parts from which they inherited from Freud, but the schools of thought ended up trying to place blame in one of the three parts. So Freud, for instance, thought that our misbehaviors, especially in the sexual arena, all came from the part that is instinctive in us. Others went a little further and said, no, this is the problem of the reality. So this is, for instance, our need for domination. So they moved it from the id to the ego. And others still, the third school of thought, moved it all the way to the superego and said, no, this is a question of morality. Here I can say morality. In other words, that people wanted to sublimate and forgo the sexual part in us, in the sense of us of creating an idea of superiority. All of these three, according to the lecture, are, you know, they have a certain purpose, they have a certain reason for being. And but this is when I say he's a little harsh, I think, because he says they all lack a roof of logic. No, it's not really that. They are very logic. They are incomplete, which is very different. To say that they lack logic is to say that, for instance, Galileo Galilei was stupid. Galileo Galilei perhaps did not know everything that we know today in terms of astronomy. Or, for instance, if we think of Newton, did not know as much physics then that we know today. But to say that these individuals were stupid is a bit harsh. They knew then what was capable, and they were pioneers in the field. All of these three schools of thought were pioneers. They show our efforts as humanity to try to understand ourselves, which is very harsh. It's very difficult to do. Think about it. We are being judged. We are being the one under judgment, and we're also being the ones that are going to express a verdict at the end. So we are three things in one. So these three schools of thought were actually showing our efforts in this in our attempts to understand ourselves, to understand why is it that we are so so bogged down, so perturbed by this particular topic, the sexual, our sexual activity, sex in the sense of everything that revolves around it. And then he says that one of the reason why it doesn't have the roof of logic is because they do not take into consideration reincarnation, which is true. All three, none of them takes into consideration. None of them take into consideration the concept of reincarnation. And what reincarnation adds to it is the atavism. Okay, there is no need to say atavic inheritance, please. Atavic or atavism is already inheritance. Atavism is what we bring, is our inheritance from our past lives. These three schools of thought do not consider multiple existences, do not consider multiple lives. So they only try to solve the problem of the individual, of the psyche in front of them right now, based on the information that they have from this lifetime. And this is where the lecturer is saying that they lack all three versions or let's say models of the human psyche with respect to sex. This is why they all lack a roof of logic. As I said, it's not necessary that they lack logic. It's just that they are incomplete. We are looking at each and every one of us only from the vantage point of this reincarnation. But we are forgetting how many hundreds of others we had before that actually built us the way we are today. Now, when I say built us the way we are today, I mean this. I don't mean that the reincarnation builds us, but we build ourselves. Don't forget that. That's what I mean. So all our past lives, everything that we have experienced, that we have lived, that we have experimented with, is now demonstrated in what we are today. So in here, I'm going to advance a little bit because the next part we're going to read. The lecturer is going to say that more than half of us have disturbances, perturbations in this particular area of our being, our, everything that is related to sex. And he's going to talk about that later on. Then he goes on at the end of this part that we just read by giving a few examples, and he starts with the phototropism, which is the movement of the plants towards the sun, and it goes on and on. It goes through fireflies, which are insects. It goes through birds, and then eventually he thinks about the beast, mammals. Basically, that is a very subtle way of showing that if we look at the nature, at the natural realm, what we see before we get to individuals who display intelligence, sentience, which is human beings, exemplified by human beings, is going from the very, very simple, the plants, all right? And we could even go to certain unicellular organisms that are also, let's say, activated, or they display a different behavior in the presence of light or not. So we get going from plants all the way to mammals, which is the last stage before being human, in a very, very coarse way. Is going through the entire evolution, everything that is on Earth, to show that we are developing ourselves from an instinctive basis. But in each and every one of those things, we see a variation on the same theme, and this variation is constantly progressing. So it starts with something as simple as the movement, the physical movement of plants towards the sun, and it ends up by a gesture that we humans might see in an animal, and in anthropomorphizing the animal, in other words, making the animal look like a human being, we say this is an act of love, which is the leak when the mother leaks the cups, for instance, like in a bear, or for the cats, or a dog, and so on and so forth. The idea here that he wants to convey is this change, this evolutionary change in biological realm, in the natural realm, and we see that we polish, that we refine, that we progress that concept of the sexual act, right? And then when it comes to us, the same that the examples of sentience, that should be even more sublime than what we expect from animals, from those who do not have the sentience that we have. One important point, so that we don't get into this discussion because it's going to really derail this whole thing, is when we speak of sentience or intelligence, it's not that there is no intelligence before human beings, and then all of a sudden, poof, we go to bed one night, not being only animals, and the next day we are intelligent, sentient beings. No. Sentient intelligence is also displaying a progress and evolution. What we consider is that we humans have the ability to articulate this intelligence in a much better expression. That is what we are going to use here. Remember that we do not go to bed one day as non-humans, non-intelligent, and then the next day we wake up, poof, we are human beings and we are intelligent. We are sentient. It's not that. But we have to have some points in this timeline that takes almost 4.2 billion years, so we can just have a better discussion, a better, it rolls off nicely, the dialogue. So this is why we say humans are intelligent, humans are sentient. So what he's saying here is that until human beings, we already see an evolution in this idea of everything that is related to sex. So it's not only just purely instinctive, it's been evolving. And then as we reach humanity stage, as we reach the sentient stage, the stage of intelligence, that should have been even more sublimated. And then he's going to say on the next line that, nope, that is not the case. And then we're going to see why. So I'll stop here to see if anyone has a question. No? Okay, Soraya, so you can continue.
Okay.
Constitute enormous legions.
Yeah. They constitute enormous legions on the primitive landscape of planetary evolution, our brothers and sisters in the infancy of knowledge, who still do not know how to create feelings in life except by mobilizing the resources arising from sexual forces. A large number of individuals, however, having gone beyond instinct to become endowed with reason, still remain in the madness of preponderance, induced by despotic caprice, starving for renown and prominence, albeit their sometime involvement in profitable work and noble aspirations. Lastly, a small group of men and women governing their own energies in a full regime of individual responsibility after having achieved sexual balance over their instincts, and after having received the rewards of their efforts with which they dominate life, have started focusing on the sublime region in the superconsciousness, no longer finding complete happiness in the physical body or in the personal prominence. They are seeking the higher circles of life, absorbed by a higher idealism. They feel that they are at the threshold of divine realms, even while still trudging on the hazy road of the flesh, like the traveler who, after crossing some harsh trails in nocturnal darkness, stops in confusion between the darkness of the night and the indefinable promises of daybreak. For them, sex, individual importance, and the advantages of immediate earthly rewards are sacred, scarce due to the opportunities they offer for the accomplishment of good deeds. Meanwhile, a new light shines in the sanctuary of their souls. The particularist reasoning has become universal understanding. Their sublimated sentiments have grown in a higher direction. They anticipate divinity and long to identify with it. They are the men and women who, having reached the highest human standards, become candidates for angelhood.
Thank you.
One way or another, however, all this entails...
No, thank you, Soraya.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. So here he also divides roughly in all human beings in three large groups, three large legions. So he says that the first one, the most largest of them all, okay, are those who are purely instinctive. We need to understand one thing. You are here reincarnated, you have a physical body. You have a physical body, sex is sex for everyone who has the same physical body. Don't ask me how it is in Jupiter, I have never been there. So we have to focus on what we have. To speculate about other things for which we have no data is to waste precious time with futile conversation. We have to talk about what we have here. And here, once we have a physical body, our physiology is the same. Okay? Our physiology is the same. We have to accept this. The difference is how we go about the whole concept of sex. This is what is going to define the three groups. We are going to see that the largest group of ourselves, is actually fueled by instinct. Then we have that second group, so that is the id-based. If we take the Freudian that we just studied, if we take the Freudian nomenclature. Then we have the ones that are the ego stage, who are those who are using it regardless of the outcome of that expression, okay, of the sexual expression. They are still using it for a sense of domination, of predominance, okay, no, there's a lot of prepotence in it. Sometimes it's whimsical. It's a sense of fulfillment of personal whims. This is the second group. So here we are moving from the id, instinctively, the instinct-based, into something that is ego-based. So that is the sense of reality of the relationship with others. And then we have a third group, a minority of us, who have seen it and have now moved it to the superego, again, according to Freud, in the sense of something more, something that is more sublimated from just the physical act itself or the physical relationship itself. And this is the one he's expounding the most at the very end, because he's saying that in these individuals, albeit still bound to a human body, the human flesh, they see the action, they see the entire expression of sex as something that can be artistic, if you allow me. It can be something that is creative, and this is in the sense of artistic, that is creative, that is constructive. So it's not just the action, the action and act of reproduction, and it's not, which is instinctive. It is not also simply an act of dominance, of prepotence, of forcing oneself onto another, of capacitation, social capacitation, but they see it something that is beyond that, that is more towards creating a life, for instance, or simply, if not creating a life, but creating an environment that is appropriate for them, that is conducive for the highest emotions, the highest expressions of our psyche. Because it doesn't have to be necessarily linked to reproduction, right? Doesn't have to be reproduction only. Okay, so these are the individuals for whom, this is a paragraph here, almost at the very beginning, the particularist reasoning has become universal understanding. Um, what it's saying there is that these individuals have seen and have now behave towards their sexual conduct, towards the expression of sex, in the sense of something that is much larger than just themselves. It is not the satisfaction of their physiology, as in the first group. It is also not for the satisfaction of their social needs, as in the second group, but they see themselves transcending all that. So their behavior ends up being universal. Their behavior ends up affecting not just themselves, but the immediacy, those around them. This is the idea that the particular reasoning that the individual who's satisfying physiology or satisfying social needs now becoming universal, becoming what am I doing for society as a whole, for as a member of this society, even if it's not that my action is going to affect everyone in society. It's not that, but it's the idea that that individual sees himself or herself within a group before he or she sees himself or herself as a member, as an individual, as a separate person. Okay?
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. One way or another, however, all this entails the creative faculties inherited from God and permanent play in the scenes of life. Within the organization, conservation, and expanse of the universe, every being is driven to create. With a meaningful facial expression, the instructor paused at length and then added in good humor, many a time individuals institute evil, divert the natural current of beneficial circumstances, and poison opportunities, thereby remaining for very long periods of time performing reparatory or expiatory work. Nonetheless, even then, we can observe the ceaseless manifestations of the creative power that is our own, even in those who go astray. They fall into the abysses of crime and flinging themselves into the valleys of darkness. But by organizing and reorganizing their actions, they acquire the blessed heritage of experience, and with experience they reach the light, peace and wisdom and love with which they draw near to God. We would thus conclude that even though Freud's analytical psychology and that of his collaborators had advanced far in the field of investigation and knowledge, partially solving certain enigmas of human psyche, they lacked the key of reincarnation to fully solve the problems of the soul. It is impossible to solve that matter definitively without the concepts of evolution, improvement, responsibility, reparation, and eternity. It is not enough to discover complexes and frustrations, to identify psychic lesions and mental deficiencies without remedying them. In other words, the simple examination of the outer layer is not enough. It is essential to reach the core and to set about modifying the causes. To do so, it is essential to confess the reality of reincarnation and immortality. Until then, therefore, Let us aid our incarnate friends in the acquisition of confidence in themselves, in the diffusion of divine hope, and continuous self-improvement through redemptive efforts. The messenger concluded with a smile. Other interesting and opportune questions were presented, receiving clear and edifying replies with real benefit to all listeners. At the end of the session, I left in silence with Calderio, who also was quiet, as if digesting the revelatory light of the concepts he had heard. I didn't know what the esteemed assistant was thinking, immersed in deep meditation. On my part, I realized that, as far as I was concerned, I had discovered a new area of knowledge in the field of sexology. From that moment onward, other concepts of love began to sprout in my awareness, illuminating my entire being.
Thank you.
Okay.
A lot of words just to say we go forward by trial and error. That's what he's saying there. We make mistakes. We started from the instinctive way, from the instinct in all of us. All right? We make mistakes. We go through many times when we have to, because the mistakes create a consequence. We have to do reparatory or expiatory work. The choices of words are okay. Do not debate too much on them. It's a disaster, to say the least, if we start saying, oh, is it reparatory or expiatory? If you start on a discussion like that, you miss the point that is someone addressing cause and consequence, actually addressing the consequences of something that that individual has caused in his or her life initially. This is the most important point. That is cause and consequence. And now this individual is going through whatever he or she set to motion before in a past life or even in the same lifetime. But in this sense, as we go forward and stumbling and falling and picking ourselves up and standing up again and walking a little bit again and falling again into another pitfall, it doesn't really matter. As long as we have in ourselves this eagerness to progress, this eagerness to address those things that we have that are pending, those things that we have that are not solved yet, that remain in our psyche, very repressed at times or suppressed sometimes, and that every now and again surface, come to the to the line, to the surface, and when it surfaces, we have to address them. Because when they surface, that is the time when we have the psychological tools in ourselves to deal with these problems. Until it does so, trying to force them to come up is not a good idea. It's always more catastrophic than constructive. But every now and again, we have a problem that comes from the deep recesses of our minds that are all have been tucked down there by ourselves, not by God. That we tucked in, and the fact that they surface now is because we have somehow figured out that it's time to deal with that. That's the reparatory or expiatory work. If you choose one word or the other, is how it is depending if you look at the problem being a bottle that is half empty or half full. And a lot of us end up getting caught up with these words, and we bog down in fruitless discussions. The point is the consequence, and the fact that an individual doing one or the other work is actually addressing consequences and progressing, which is the most important thing. And it's in this stumble and fall and picking oneself up, and again stumbling and fall and picking oneself up, we progress. We move towards, which is the next stage, we move towards God. We move towards learning the light, the peace, the wisdom, the love, everything that stems from God. And this is the part that all three schools of thought before have not addressed, because they only looked at the individual from the standpoint of a single lifetime. And we see here the need to look at the individual from a past life, because all of this behavior we display today is nothing more than the consequence of all that we have experienced before. Without addressing reincarnation, without addressing past lives, according to our beliefs, it's not possible to look at the individual today. It's like judging a fruit from its rind, from its skin. If that were the case, no one would ever sink their teeth into a kiwi, for instance. It just looks really ugly from the outside. And there are fruits that are even worse than that. So when we look at ourselves from the point of view of our sexual conduct, from the point of view of the creative power of sex, don't forget that sex is concentrated in the genesic center of energy, which is also the center of energy responsible for creativity, for artistry. Don't forget that, right? It's not just related to our sexual organs, it's related to the expression of what is artistic, of what is creative in us. So when we look at ourselves only from the point of view of the physiology, which is the rind or the skin or the peel of a fruit, we cannot judge from what is inside. We cannot judge what is inside. I'm sorry. We cannot judge if the fruit is going to be sweet, it's going to be tart, it's going to be bitter. Have no idea. The only way is if we look at everything. And to be able to look at everything, which would be the equivalent of slicing the fruit and look at it inside, we have to look at our past lives. And that's how he ended this lecture. And he tells us that they are, remember, in the spiritual realm, they have actually to help the brothers and sisters here as reincarnated beings. They have to help us without judgment, because the whole point is that each and every one of us have to find, we all have to find in ourselves the path towards this stumbling, falling, and picking oneself up, stumbling and falling. But as long as we are in this process, we are good to go, because we are learning. The problem is when we stall in one of these stages, particularly the stumbling and the falling, or when we become completely aggressive against everything and everyone and everything, and we isolate ourselves, because in either one situation, we stop progressing. We stall. We do not regress, but we stall. And we need always to be moving forward towards that love, towards that wisdom that is from God, the divine wisdom, the divine love, which is the absolute wisdom, the absolute love. So that was the chapter. It's a tough one, because we all have our boo-boos and about it, but I think we did pretty well, to be honest with you. I thank you all. And I just ask that if you ever read this again, never forget to keep in mind that André Luiz is not presenting an outcome of the sexual revolution, or an outcome about the sexual act only, but everything that is related to sex. And not only that is also looking at ourselves as human beings from the very, very first day we got the name human being, where we became Homo sapiens until today. So it's a long time. Because the idea is not to pinpoint dates or pinpoint events, but to show the evolutionary path we have been taking, because we're still on it.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because this was written before the so-called sexual revolution, right?
Exactly.
And you may think that, oh, this is old knowledge, old information, and 50 years later is as updated, as actual as it can be, right? In terms of understanding sex and the problems related with sex. You know, the sexual revolution hasn't changed much of what was said here. It's just a different way of looking at it, and more openness in some areas and more understanding in others, but still, as they divide the majority of us in three parts, this mentor divides the majority of us in three parts, and it's still what we are going through, right? Maybe as we evolve, we get more and more people on the third aspect of it, and we get more and more on the second and less on the first, but we still are pretty much divided in those three aspects.
Yes, I mean, for those who are interested in reading a little more about this from the point of view of Spiritism, and also not from the point of view of sexual act, but sexual conduct, everything that is related, you should read some of the books by Joana de Angelis as well. There's also Sex and Destiny by André Luiz and Francisco Xavier from the same collection. But in Joana de Angelis, she mentions it very clearly that what the sexual revolution did was to move us from one extreme to the next, to the other. We went from the extreme where it was only immoral if we were caught, to the one that nobody cares, you can do whatever you want. And the truth is actually neither one or the other. It's something in the, and she's talking more about behavior, because she's an intense behaviorist. She's saying that the truth is very much towards the middle of this. It's not a question of morality. It's not a question of immorality. It's not a question of being caught or not, because it's not something that should be done in the darkness, sub rosa. But it's also not something that will be done explicitly and expose other individuals to it unnecessarily, but has to be done with responsibility and love. And this love and this responsibility is in neither one of the extremes. But as John pointed out, this is before the sexual revolution, and yet it is as up to date as ever. Anyone?
Okay, we're changing gears, so
I have the gavel here.
I have a question.
Okay.
Obviously. But it's just, I've been listening since we started this morning and trying to formulate it, and I couldn't. So before you use your gavel, I'm gonna try to say something and see if it makes sense. Being a single woman in New York City, I'm coming out and saying this like just a preamble, because I think it says a lot. I've been struggling with the idea of the sexual interactions that we have, and the desire to find a companion, a partner, because I feel like we are born wired for it, right? And organizing my thoughts and the interactions toward the idea of universal love. Obviously, we're not there yet, but there's a new wave now of ethical polyamorous behavior that seems to be, facing in a way that kind of, more universal love, or at least like dealing with certain things that could be in our nature as well, but are so difficult for many of us. Do you think there's a connection between, this new liberal view of ethical, non-monogamous relationships and the universal love and where our sexual behavior is going toward?
Short answer, I don't have an answer for you from the books. A little longer answer, my understanding of what I have read is that at the moment, at this very moment, we have great difficulty focusing our energies to go towards a polyamorous idea. To me seems disastrous because society is not geared in that way. I'm not saying that it cannot change, but it's not built that way. And we do not have the discipline and the focus for it. I speak generally. If we look at exceptions, there's always going to be an exception for everything, and then we will never get anywhere. So I believe that companionship, which is much more than just a sexual partner, there's much more than any other word we might think of, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it is, husband, wife, companionship is a maturation process. And in this maturation process, two beings have to get to know one another. They have to slowly give themselves time to test each other's boundaries, to learn to respect one another. Respect is not something you buy from a shelf, from a supermarket shelf. So in this process, it is so intense. It's so demanding that a lifetime is sometimes not enough. Or it's not this, say it's too short. And this is why we take to the spiritual realm our preferences, our beliefs, our loves, because it remains with us and we continue them there. So to go towards a polyamorous idea, I think it is to be shallow in each one of them. So you get quantity, but you don't get quality. And if you add them all together, you don't get one. And it's the oneness of two individuals that we want. This oneness where the two continue to be each one a separate being. There's no such a thing that they meld into one another. No. But they behave as one. They believe as one. So to me, this idea today, it's going from one extreme to another. One extreme being the selfishness, and the other one is the polyamorous one. Both extremes have a lot of demands on us, demands that we cannot fulfill, that we cannot meet, and that we end up with numbers but no quality. And in companionship, it's all about quality, because in the end, no one is asking for the superlatives of the next person. What we want is, how do we feel when that person is sitting right next to us on a couch? That is what really counts in a relationship. So all the superlatives that that person may have will not be any good at that moment.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think also, Julia, goes back to the problem with that is that we go back to what we studied on Thursday, selfishness, right? We are still too selfish to be able to share this idea. We are, if we think of us as eternal spirits, we we will love all brothers and sisters equally. But that's not how we are built today. That's not how we are today. And that's, and you know, we have to we would have to evolve to go beyond the individual relationships, and we would have to go beyond the sexual needs in terms of physical needs to be able to make this a norm for society. At our stage of evolvement, at our imperfection, we are not even remotely prepared to deal with such a concept.
Exactly.
It may be a concept that one day will work, but that will take, in my opinion, really some hundreds or thousands of years in terms of evolution, of our individual evolutions, for us to be able to deal with it in a spiritual way, in a sense.
Yeah,
Paco has a question.
Yeah. We still see companionship as a form of possession, unfortunately.
Yes.
When I say that, I'm not talking about, oh, I should not say my wife, my husband, my children, my boyfriend, my girlfriend. It's not that I don't have any problems with the possessive pronoun, okay? Because that's the language we have. Okay? When we start splitting hairs about these things, to me, it's like deviating from the main topic. But it's our actions. It's the way we see the companion, whatever the companion is. So our idea of companionship is still very possessive. It is still very exclusivist. It's what João was saying. It will take us many, many, many centuries still for us to polish that exclusivism out of our relationships. We get jealous even when one of our friends have friends with somebody else. Now imagine when you put that to a companion. So it is very hard. Paco. Is Paco muted?
Yes, I'm trying.
Okay, now.
You're unmuted now, Paco.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, in the passage they mentioned Freud, and the other two psychologists that were actually students of Freud, which is Carl Jung and Adler. Okay, I just wanted to Freud was the father of psychoanalysis. Jung was the father of analytical psychology, and Adler was the father of individual psychology. Just wanted to make a comment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And actually, Joana de Angelis relates, a lot of her studies are based on Jung, right?
Yes. She's more of a Jungian. But not an exclusive Jungian.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I believe that Jungian is like, to me, was kind of a medium himself. But that's another story.
Okay.
So I have the gavel in my hand, going once, going twice. No questions? Okay. Going for the third time. Chapter 12, a strange illness.
Let's go, Zoraida.
Is Zoraida muted?
I think so. Zoraida?
I'm here.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was muted. Okay, the strange illness. Accompanying Calderaro, the selfless brother of sufferers, I entered a comfortable home and was led directly into the presence of a gentleman who was resting. It was an elegant room decorated in antique gold. A magnificent carpet completed the graceful surroundings. He was covered with the whimsical apparatus that matched the designs on the ceiling. The patient was stretched out on a couch, absorbed in deep thought. At his side, a humble spirit from our rim appeared to be waiting for us. She approached, greeted us kindly, and answered the fraternal inquiries of the assistant. Fabrizio is improving, but his anguish continues. He has been uneasy and worried. My instructor gazed expressively at the patient and asked further, is he still in control of himself? Has he completely abandoned himself to destructive thoughts? Displaying her contentment, she said, divine mercy hasn't been lacking. For the time being, complete imbalance hasn't taken over. In Jesus' name, our efforts have been prevailing. Calderaro turned to me fraternally. Have you ever examined a case diagnosed as schizophrenia? I hadn't acquired any specialized learning on the subject, but was aware that his particular sickness was one of the most troubling issues in modern psychiatry. This unappreciated scientific branch, which studies the pathology of the soul, declared my companion, grasping my lack of knowledge, has been a battlefield between psychologists and physiologists and psychologists for quite some time. Such a conflict is regrettable and complex, since both currents have substantial reasons for their arguments. Even so, we must acknowledge the fact that psychology occupies the better position. It gets to the deep causes of the problem, whereas physiology only analyzes the effects and tries to remedy them on the surface. The assistant suggested that I examine the patient's mental condition. I examined him inwardly and was alarmed at the anxieties that occurred his being. The brain displayed strange anomalies. The whole lower surface showed dark spots. The disturbances of the circulation, movement, and senses were quite visible. Calderaro had introduced me to Fabrizio, classifying him as schizophrenic. But might this be a case of neurocirculatory asthenia?
Thank you.
Okay.
Guess asthenia.
Okay, we'll get there. We'll get there. So here we go with André Luiz and Brother Calderaro. Remember, André Luiz is the one describing everything to us. So André Luiz and Calderaro goes to a physical realm, and this is at a house where there is a person called Fabrizio. And is a man, and he's lying there, and he's basically so moving. He's he's alive, of course, but we see that he's very lethargic. Let's put it this way. And there is a spirit there. It's a woman that addresses Brother Calderaro and André Luiz, and she conveys to them that he is not the he's showing some improvement. She is not very clear how much this improvement is. Just saying that there has not been a lack of divine mercy, of assistance towards this individual, Fabrizio, right? And then Brother Calderaro tells André Luiz that this is a schizophrenic patient. Now, in schizophrenia, in general terms, okay, before I explain, I give the definition of schizophrenia, because I'm no psychiatrist, it's important that we understand that we are going to use some technical terms here, and we are going to see what they mean in the physical sciences, in other words, the sciences of this physical world. And we are going to add to these meanings something that comes from the spiritual realm. So just be very careful, because as we add something to it, it may not be what is believed here by medical sciences, by physical sciences, but we are using what the book is giving to us. are using spiritist nomenclature, spiritist concept as well. So that we don't get caught up in this particular difference. So Brother Calderaro tells André Luiz that this is a schizophrenic individual, and a schizophrenic individual is one who has difficulty interpreting reality. In other words, the interpretation of the reality is abnormal in one form or another. And there are many subforms, there are many classifications depending on the type of interpretation or the results of the interpretation, which really do not belong. I mean, I'm not the person to discuss this, and it's not pertinent to the reading of this chapter. What is important for us to understand is that is a situation when an individual, as he or she is observing, interacting with the world, this individual collects sensorial input and processes them, but this processing leads to an interpretation that is very far removed from the normal curve, from what most individuals would have interpreted in their place. So it's an abnormal, next to normal, but not normal. For the person, seems normal. And this is why a schizophrenic has difficulty snapping out of it. But because if you try to classify this individual next to a large group of other individuals, we'll see that their interpretation of the same phenomena or the same sensorial inputs or stimuli is very different from those, from the group, from the average. Now, that's what we call abnormal, next to normal, but not normal. Okay? It's a statistical concept, right? We are very, I think most of our lives, we are very used to black and white, yin and yang. And we have to understand that when we speak of diseases, when we speak, for instance, of cures, when we speak of everything that is not just in the medical sciences, also physical sciences and social sciences, there's always a curve of distribution of responses. And the vast majority of it, the bulk of the curve, is what we call normal. And anything next to it is the abnormal. And the further and further and further and further away you are from this normal part of the curve is what we call the extreme behaviors or extreme responses. Okay? So the schizophrenic is a person who has an abnormal interpretation of reality. And the Brother Calderaro tells André Luiz that unfortunately there are two approaches to it, the physiologists and the psychologists. And he says that each one has its merits, with psychologists being more capable of dealing with the situation because they try to understand more the root of the problem rather than looking at the symptomatology. In other words, the physiologists are the ones looking at what is going on with the physical body. So is the heart rate slowing or speeding up? Is the pressure going up, going down? These is the physiological responses. And then they address the physiological responses, but they don't look at the root of the problem. The psychologists also, the psychologists try to look more towards the mind, towards what caused it. But once again, as we saw in the previous chapter, when we spoke of Freud, I know Freud was a psychiatrist or a psychoanalyst, but remember that at this point, we are considering psychology and psychoanalysis very, very relatable fields. The psychologists not being capable of looking at multiple lives, only looking at this one in particular, lack that little extra mile, let's put it this way, to be able to go to the root of the problem. Nevertheless, psychology has a better position to tackle this problem in particular, right? And then André Luiz looks at the individual and sees that the individual is very sluggish. The individual is kind of morbid. And he says, well, isn't it possible that this is something called neurocirculatory asthenia? Asthenia means weakness. It's a general weakness. And asthenia is a very, very generalized diagnosis. And there are many forms, many things that can cause asthenia. For instance, overexertion when you go to the gym after having gone to the gym for years. You can become asthenic. Not only that, you're going to be very sore in most of your muscles, or at least the muscles that you worked out. Okay? Or, for instance, if you have diabetes and your blood sugar goes up very to a very high point, you may suffer from something called respiratory acidosis, and your breath will smell like acetone, for instance, and that can lead you to asthenia. Okay, this very weakness, and if it continues, it can even take you into a coma, which is the probably the extreme of lack of alertness, extreme of immobility. Let's put it this way. But there are many other circumstances, like a very bad flu can leave you. A very bad cold can also leave you asthenic, weak. You have difficulty moving. Some of you may have difficulty breathing. It's not that you can't breathe, but it's labored, and it's in this labor that we classify the asthenic situation. Now, what André Luiz saw, remember André Luiz and Brother Calderaro are in the spiritual realm. What André Luiz saw was at the physical and perispiritual side of Fabricio. He is capable of penetrating the dense matter of the physical body. And it's very important that we look at some details of the language here. So you see that the whole lower surface showed dark spots. Now, the lower surface of the brain, mind you, because it says the brain in the previous paragraph, previous sentence. So we studied some time ago that the lowest portions of the brain, just before it funnels into the pons and the spinal cord, those are the areas of the brain who control what we call autonomic responses. What are autonomic responses? The beating of the heart, okay, the peristaltic movement of our esophagus for us to be able to swallow, the peristaltic movement of our intestines to be able to move first, what we call the food bolus, and later on, much later on, when we get into the large intestines, when that food bolus becomes fecal bolus, so that for us to be able to excrete feces. Okay, the movement of the diaphragm, this huge muscle that is in our midsection that moves slightly up and down, and doing so assists our lungs in inflating and deflating. All of these things, they work without our knowledge of them, or I should say it better, without our awareness of their working. When we go to sleep at night, our hearts continue to beat. Thank God, right? Our lungs continue to breathe in and out, right? Even some part of the peristaltic movement is present there, okay? So these are the autonomic, not automatic, mind you, autonomic functions. And these autonomic functions are controlled by the lower part of our brains. So these things, and this is why, for instance, André Luiz says that he might have been suffering from neurocirculatory asthenia because he's having difficulty breathing, has difficulty moving. So all of these are related to the beating of the heart, to the movement of the diaphragm, of the muscle that allows us to breathe, and so on and so forth. This is why André Luiz, looking at him physically and perispiritually, is saying, why not neurocirculatory asthenia as opposed to schizophrenia? And André Luiz is now going to receive the answer from the instructor, Brother Calderaro. So was it clear, Paco? Because you were asking about asthenia right away.
Weakness.
Anyone has any questions or comments? No?
Okay.
Okay, Soraya, let's drop the other shoe before we close.
Okay. The instructor listened patiently and remarked, that would be the correct diagnosis of our friend's condition at the moment. Schizophrenia, however, originates in the subtle perturbations of the paraspiritual organism and manifests in the physical vessel as a surprising combination of variable and undefined illnesses. As it stands at present, this is the case of Xavier's disease with all its special characteristics.
Thank you.
With a serious look.
Nope, thanks.
Okay.
That's it. There's,
Okay.
there is a mouthful there. And this is the other
Okay,
shoe.
yes.
I wanted at least to
Okay,
drop
yes.
the other shoe before we finish. Okay?
Okay, good.
So,
Good.
thank you. So, the first thing is don't get so sidetracked. We have already discussed Xavier's disease, actually named after, despite the name, it's actually a French physiologist, Maurice. Okay? He was, you know, you wouldn't think if it's a French person from the name. I was surprised when I looked it up, actually. But the point here is, if you look at the footnote, I don't know if there's a footnote there, but I will read for you. A syndrome characterized by tachycardia, the quick beating of the heart, insomnia, lack of sleep, okay, lightheadedness or vertigo, hyperesthesia, and a feeling of emptiness in the head, called also cerebrocardiac syndrome. Yeah, actually, the Xavier's disease has a lot of synonyms, not just these two. But the whole point is we have here a lack of control of some of the parts that are very autonomic. For instance, when you think about tachycardia, all right, when you think about lightheadedness, because this lightheadedness may be related to breathing. Also, lightheadedness may be related to certain types of arc reflexes that allows us to, for instance, I'll tell you, let me give you an example because I think it's easier. When you're looking at something, so right now, for instance, you're looking at the screen. When you breathe in and out, your head moves in space ever so slightly. You may not be able to see it, but it's moving at maybe 0.5 millimeter to one side or to the front. It's wobbling, it's jittering a little bit. If there is something in our eyes, okay, it's an arc reflex that compensates for it, because if we did not have that, we would suffer from dizziness, from vertigo, from lightheadedness, because we would be it's like some people that feel sick in a car, they have motion sickness, then we will all be motion sick. So we have arc reflexes that are controlled. We're not aware of it. It's built in and it's autonomic. And this allows us to adjust the vision perception to compensate for these minor adjustments of our breathing in and out, and with that, the slight movement of our heads. So all of these symptoms that we are seeing here in the footnote are related to that part that I told you, the lower part of the brain. That's where all this information is processed. Now, this particular arc reflex that I told you about, it can also go to the back of the brain, where we call the occipital area, where we also process imagery, you know, the images that we receive from our eyes, through our eyes. And but the point here is, without going too much in the biology of it, is we are looking at an individual who's prostrate. He's just lying there, okay? So here's where I told you that little finesse in terms of diagnosing the condition. André Luiz diagnoses it from the point of view of medical sciences, physical sciences. Remember, he had been a doctor in his last reincarnation. So he goes straight with neurocirculatory asthenia, because he's still very attached to what he sees physically. And then Brother Calderaro being the more mature of the group, the instructor, he says, well, it is a schizophrenia because he sees beyond that, because he sees that these perturbations that are physical are actually from the perispiritual organism, from the perispirit. So here we have another instance where we have a description of how the perispirit affects the physical body. So the perturbations are perispiritual in their origin. And then they are relayed, like a signal is relayed from one tower to another to get to our cellular phone, to our mobile phone. The signal is relayed from perispirit to the physical body. The physical body produces symptoms that in the physical realm we would see as neurocirculatory asthenia. But if we could see a little beyond, we would say this is a schizophrenic individual. So I hope that was clear, because it's very crucial for our chapter. I don't want to go any further than this today. So if you have questions, we have some time.
It's interesting, right? Because we just did last week the study of the perispirit, right? And
Yes.
and we discussed that all sensations come from the perispirit to the physical body, and all the perturbations will also come from the perispirit, right?
Yep. No, it's look. It's not that the physical body cannot create sensations back to the perispirit, but we are seeing here the other way. So in this chapter, we're studying what is in the perispirit moving towards the physical body. And this is, I think, very nice because it ties with what João was teaching us last week about the perispirit. And one of the reasons why we need to have a concept of the beyond, that is not just this life, because there are many things we cannot solve just by looking at what we are today or what we do today. So João, you're having everyone on mute today?
Yeah, the sound today was not very clear, so I was trying to mute people to stop the noise, but it's not a, nobody's forced to be on mute. You can manifest yourselves if you want.
I think you scared everyone when you said that you were recording it.
Yes, yeah. But I think
Aline is not easily scared, so I'm gonna ask a question.
Okay, shoot.
Well, I know this is probably going to be a longer answer, so I appreciate that we don't have too much time. But this is an ongoing question that I have, and schizophrenia is one of the perturbations that come to mind. I get very confused with the amount of influence that physical and material factors have in mental problems. And for example, I think that these days with coronavirus lockdown and quarantine, we have been forced to be indoors, and with that we're getting less vitamin D, we're getting less endorphins because we're not like in the presence of others. And I think that those are outside factors that would contribute with the mental problems. I know this is a long answer, so I apologize if we need to discuss another time, but do you think that, where is the separation?
Okay, it is a long answer, but I can give at least something today. I don't want you to go, to your week without having anything. And I'm also going to give you what we believe in Spiritism, because it may be a little different from physical sciences, medical sciences in particular. But it's very important that all that you said is true, all right? The lack of, or the decreased amount of endorphins or the less exposure to the sunlight, for instance. There's so many things. But it's also very important that we understand that these situations are not caused by, in Spiritism, mental conflicts, mental diseases, perturbations, let's call them together all in one as mental conditions. They are in the spirit, and they are brought to the physicality. What the outside, the environment, the neighborhood, the stimuli can do is trigger what is already there. So I may have a schizophrenic tendency, and I may come here and live an entire lifetime and never ever develop any symptoms, manifest any symptoms, because I never get in contact with the triggers. But the moment that I get in contact with the triggers, boom, I manifest, because it's in me, it's already there. But they are not going to cause something, because that would mean that, in spiritually speaking, I would have to regress. I would have to unlearn or destroy some learning or some knowledge or some quality attribute of myself in order to develop that. This shows to us, Aline, in general, that we're all sick in a way, that we are all still learning, evolving, and we have a lot to go. Whenever we present symptoms, it means that we have things in ourselves that are still buried there, and we're simply just getting contact with triggers. And those triggers are making us manifest, express the symptomatology, the symptoms.
Thank you, João. Sorry, Julio.
That's really okay. Don't worry.
And I you know, and it's short, but it's food for thought. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
Julio, oh, sorry.
Now go ahead,
Yes,
Carol.
may I? Oh, yes. Julio, would there be possibly an issue when a person has schizophrenia that could have resulted in the abuse of mediumship from a past life or past lives? Thank you. I don't know if that makes sense. But...
Yes, the causes of schizophrenia are multiple. Schizophrenia is, since it is the abnormal interpretation of reality, we may have an individual who has abused of mediumistic abilities in the past and has created a bubble in which this individual now places himself or herself. And in doing so, the interaction of this person with the rest of the world today is still from within that bubble. So it's like looking at everything with some very dark sunglasses, or what we call it, and we have the expression rose tinted glasses. But the only thing is that in this case, rose may give the idea of something nice. This is with the very, very black idea of looking at life, because that is why we have this paralysis or this inertia or this moribund state. But yes, the cause may be abuse of mediumistic abilities in the past.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay. Thank you all. Just a reminder, everything we study is recorded and it's on YouTube, so you can go there and listen again. Reminder of next weekend that we have the 14th US Spiritist Symposium on Saturday and Sunday. Saturday starting at 4 p.m. our time, Eastern time, and on Sunday starting at noon Eastern time. You are all invited to participate through the United States Spiritist Federation Facebook or YouTube. Of course, we are not going to have our regular Sunday studies, because we are going to be participating on the symposium. We invite all to participate, to join us, at least in part. You can go to spiritistsymposium.org for the schedule, for all the information, on our emails, on our website. You have more information also. If you have any questions, please let us know. But it is the most important annual event in English that the United States Spiritist Federation does. We have a lot of events that you see around in Portuguese, but this one is the one focused on the English-speaking population. So it's very important that all of us that are trying to disseminate Spiritism in English participate in it, at least in part of it, so we can have a good audience and a good result. Okay, so I hope to see you all next weekend on the symposium. Thank you for joining us. And we are going to ask now Carol to do our final prayer.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Julio. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. Infinite Creator and Supreme Intelligence, we are grateful for the opportunity today to be together for studies in the greater world. We appreciate the topics that we have delved into: sex, sexuality, and the topic of schizophrenia. We are being gifted with these understandings, with a greater enlightenment of these subjects, knowing that we're moving, that we're growing, that we're sharing these studies together and developing our consciousness to a higher level. We are thankful. We are truly grateful to our spiritual benefactors, the good spirits, the mentors who are with us today. They are guiding us with their wisdom as we receive the blessings from them of love, light, and healing. We are truly grateful. We give thanks for what we have learned today, knowing that we are moving or have moved through the 3 stages of the ego, of the id, the ego, and the superego. We are learning at this stage, hopefully, that we will be sublimating a lot of the activities of sex and sexuality to the greater good, to a greater creativity, to a greater beauty, and a greater awareness. We hope that the planet is also evolving in this way as well. We give thanks for our studies, and may we continue throughout the week with our prayers, with our mindfulness, and with our contemplations. And as we close this portion or this meeting today, we are truly grateful for what we have received. We give thanks and receive the light of Christ and love within us. May we close and ask humbly for safety, for protection, for guidance, for not only ourselves, but for our loved ones, our friends, our co-workers, and those who we have in mind who may have gone to the spirit world. We give thanks for the lessons today, for the teachings, for the guidance, for the directors of this center. May we be blessed and go forth as beacons of light. Go forth now in peace. So be it. Thank you, everyone.